Hey everybody! Before we start the show off, I'm just going to apologize. Before I had my mic at a close distance while I was recording, primarily because my voice rarely shows up properly, or it comes in too low when I have group calls. So between that and trying to get my gain magically set for Discord, I'm a bit loud and a bit reverby. I've spent like 5 hours trying to get it as best as I could, so I apologize ahead of time for the audio. In spite of that, we have really great content for today. So let's get on with the show.
We made it for the rebellion, y'all.
Right for the rebellion. All right. Welcome back to Starting Over Podcast. This is not about hero clicks. This is about politics, mainly diversity in comics, mainly from an ethnic perspective. So if you're not feeling that, that's fine. Okay. Just skip over this episode. I'll see you next episode. It's all good. No butthurt feelings anywhere, okay? Of course, I've got the gentleman from the previous show. I've got Kyrie Sampson. I've got Big Will Holland, and I have KJ Foster with me. So I'm going to start it off, and we're going to start off with something that Will and I have talked about for years, literally years. It's a hypothetical book. Is what would happen if Superman and Batman talked about race? And in particular, in when it comes to humanity. And the main setup is Superman is an alien. He's not a human. He looks human, but he's not a human. So his perspective, while it is he lives life as a human, knowing that he's not a human, he also lives life as a white male, even though he knows he's not a white male. Okay?
Right.
He has white male features, but consciously he understands that he's not a white male. He's a Kryptonian. Okay? Whereas you have
male human.
Huh?
Not a white male.
Yeah, he's not a white male human. He's a white male Kryptonian. You can make that argument. Mm-hmm. Or pink or whatever freaking continent there is in Krypton that he came from. Because we know there are brown people on Krypton. We know that for a fact.
Do we though?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Not just the world where we have President Black Superman, but Earth 2 Superman had black guys. The Krypton show had black people. And there's a couple of other different references to dark-skinned, black, afro-looking people from Krypton throughout DC.
In the main DC universe?
In the main DC universe, yes. Except when they freaking did War of the Supermen, everybody was white, which I didn't get that, but okay. I guess that was just like an artist faux pas or something.
Yeah, well, just remember, too, there was about 24 hours where Superman dated a black woman.
Oh, when Lois Lane was black?
Yep.
Yeah.
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 Oh. Yeah, that was the thing.
That happened. That was in the Lois Lane book, wasn't it?
Yes. It was like my girlfriend Lois Lane, I think was the name of it.
Or Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Late 60s or early 70s, I do not remember when.
Yeah, she had a microfro, so yeah.
Yep.
She had that. But the idea is the two characters can honestly talk about race, mainly because there's no observers. And they don't have to worry about being shamed about for their opinions. And there's two people that see themselves as equals. And Superman can see himself from being a person of mediocre means. And Batman looks at things from a higher means or a higher economic status type situation, but also a person that's, slummed it. So it's always that perspective of that conversation should happen, but it will never happen because it's two white guys talking about race, and everybody will say it's like a situation where there's a bunch of privilege. Where I would look at it is I sort of feel like that same situation happens when we hear conversations about race among comic book readers. It's usually a bunch of white guys talking about race and or diversity or whatever else. And then they're like, hey, I'm woke, yay, yay, diversity. And then the other ones are like, yo, make your own new characters, just don't race bend my characters. And in part, I personally feel like on the woke end, it's just mainly to say, yo, I'm not racist. Which is really what I feel it comes down to. Like, you don't read half these characters. You're just like, yo, I'm not racist. They're okay being here.
Right.
So I'm going to say what I need to say because I don't want to get associated that I'm a Klan member. Like, to say I don't like these guys is to automatically make me a Klan member, which is not true. And then on the other end, I do think it does get annoying for other people. It's like, hey, I don't want to see them here. And this is just my perspective from like listening to the conversation, is they're tired of the characters that they like getting sort of appropriated. and I sort of get that because I would just love black characters that existed for black characters' sake, and they weren't just walking in the steps behind the white character. Like, because I was arguing...
Always being the legacy character.
Right. Because the majority of black characters are legacy.
You think about an example of that, you think of like somebody that I actually at work this past week, it's my head of HR, surprisingly enough. And she's a big comic nerd. And she was just like, I got into this conversation with somebody the other day, and I'm sitting there going, I can't imagine you just randomly getting into this conversation with somebody, but okay. She was talking about Wally West and how, we had the red-headed Wally West. She said, well, I identified with him, as a kid, even though she's not red-headed at all. She identified with Wally West. And she was just like, she didn't understand why they created a black Wally West later on during the New 52. And then, and I'm sitting there going, well, first of all, the red-headed Wally ain't dead. Like, he came back. Like, they coexisted up until this recent thing wherever he got killed during this whole, DC has a psych clinic.
Oh, yeah, you were telling me about that.
Yeah.
But my thing about that is, it's like, okay, I said, but let's put a perspective on that. I said, because somebody came to her and said, well, it's another black guy at work. He was like, well, when my kid looks at comics, most of the comics were written by old Jewish white guys. So most of your characters, your lead characters like Captain America and, Spider-Man, Superman, and all these other characters are predominantly white. So, for example, looking at my kid looking at comics and going, okay, who's he supposed to identify with?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You're saying you want somebody to identify with because he's redheaded. Okay, that's cool, but who is my kid supposed to look up to?
Yeah.
If you look at heroes, because most of the bigger heroes are white.
Right.
And the other thing about that is, those of us who did grow up reading comics as black people, we still found characters to identify with,
right,
even if they didn't look like us. So to say, that there's not this redheaded character for me to identify with. That's kind of ridiculous. It's like we've been able to do it mostly because we've had to do it all our lives. So maybe it's time for our fellow white comic book readers to do the same. Identify with somebody who doesn't look like you for once.
Yeah.
Well, let me say something on that too.
Go ahead.
Oh, because I think we're actually hitting it on the head. I really do. Oh, first you have to understand that a lot of these, I won't use the word inventions, but that's what I would use the word invention or creations of comic book characters came at a point in time where, it was mostly, I'm trying to be politically correct when I say it. It was at a time where minorities were not looked upon in a favorable light. Let's say it that way. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you start to create these characters. You had the influence of disposable income, all these different things come into a factor of who's going to buy this. Okay. Okay, because that's at the end of the day what comic books were about. Is it was about buying, okay, buying power. So they make these characters throughout the years, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, okay? And then around the 60s, you know, you have the civil rights that are going on and, you know, treat everybody equal. It's more of a talk and more of an action, let's say it that way. So you start to see the comic books now start to change, and you see influencing of black characters, minority characters that's coming into the picture. And it starts to, I want to say, it starts the changing of the narrative. Different writers, different people with different ideas are coming into the comics, and they're starting to make it, I won't use the word politically correct, but they're trying to make it diverse because that's how the world is being viewed today. Okay. And so, right, when someone says, hey, you know, this is somebody I can relate to, that's true. Back in the day, if you look at the 50s and the 40s and when these guys originally came out, yes, it's someone that you would relate to. But now, you may not have been around back then, but now you relate to people that's not the same skin tone as you. Therefore, comic books are going to relate the same exact way. So, I mean, it's like a full cycle almost. That's what it's all about. But I understand both sides.
Yeah.
I do. I really do understand both sides. And you take a look at who was your sports figure growing up, okay? Look at it from that standpoint. Who is your favorite sports figure growing up, all right? And that's somebody who you're going to relate to. But if you didn't see them on television, or if you didn't get a visual of them, okay, or didn't have a chance to see them, then who was your sports figure?
Now that's a good point, because then it comes down to what you're drawn to the narrative, or is what you're drawn to is just merely the shell in which the narrative is in, and that's sort of my issue. Is like, for example, I've never liked Superman. I've never liked Superman. There's moments where I've been able to read Superman and been like, yay, like that's some good writing. But as a character, I've never liked Superman, mainly because I always saw him as this is a white god. Like, there's nobody that could touch him. There's no equal to him. And yeah, you could say magic can do whatever, but literally you have to set up the magic so far in advance for you to actually get Superman. If Superman was legit using his full abilities, it's like, oh, I'm about to cast a spell. Superman could just zip over there and punch you in the mouth and be like, you're not doing nothing. Or even could say he could go fly across the world, get some duct tape, come back, wrap your mouth up, and stop you from using the spell. Plus bind your hands so you can't do any hand magic. There is no reason why anybody should ever get magic off on Superman. Okay?
What?
But when I look at those around Superman, I'm like, all right, here's some narratives I can start looking at. It's just like when I got older, I couldn't really, I started to disdain Wonder Woman. Because when I'm like, hey, this whole Amazonian thing starts to sound like female superiority. Like, when the more and more I read books, I'm like, hold up, wait. Like, I couldn't get into it. So when I started playing disdain to that, then folks would be like, hey, Edward, do you have a problem with white people? Do you have a problem with women? And I was like, and so I took a step back. I'm like, I don't have a problem with women. I have a problem with Wonder Woman and this Amazonian narrative. And I have a problem with Superman because he's functionally just a white god running around. Like, there's really nobody else in that universe that can really mess with him unless the writers depower him. And I've had debates with people about my view on Superman. And so I've looked at that. So I can understand how someone could say, all of a sudden, I know, like, this is an old reveal. It's like Iron Man's black. This guy that we thought was Iron Man the entire time, it's actually, Rhodes being Iron Man.
Right.
I can understand how that could be a thing, but then for that period, That's sort of like a bigger issue, just like the Uhura and Kirk kiss. That's a bigger thing. But now I'm like, all right, we're past the part where like, oh, hey, to introduce this character so that the people don't get all shaken, we're going to put them in the, skin that they're used to, and then eventually we'll break them out after a while. I'm like, why don't you just start with the character being the character? Like originally I like Sync. I like Prodigy. They weren't in any other black superhero skin. I liked Bishop. I liked, Jon Stewart is a legacy character. But you also see Jon Stewart being completely antithetical to Hal Jordan. They're both military. Jon is serious. Hal is not. Jon is monogamous primarily. Hal is a womanizer. Okay? And I'm not just saying this to demonize Hal, because Hal can have some cool charisma moments where Jon doesn't. But Jon is clearly his own person, and it's in the Green Lantern Corps is set up where it's multiple types of people that have the name Green Lantern. He is not like Hal Jordan is not the quote Green Lantern.
He definitive Green Lantern.
He is a Green Lantern. So it works a lot better. And so I can love that about those characters. But the problem I have back is sort of going to that Facebook conversation I was telling you about, is when the narrative, when the writer starts, and most of the writers are white male or white women now. They're not really African American male or female. They primarily are white male or pseudo woke white females that are trying to be politically correct. Okay? All right. And so what ends up happening is they'll pick their characters, and most of which they identify with or have favor for. And then when they have their initial lineup, they're like, oh, crap, this looks bad. This looks problematic. I picked all white people, or I picked all light-skinned people. Now I must pick some minority that doesn't fit the mission, doesn't fit the story, doesn't work at all for what I'm trying to do, so that I'm not racist. And, and
you know what, though?
That's tokenism.
I'm not mad about that at all.
Okay, I'm willing to hear a counterpoint.
So I actually recounted this even in my own, Black Panther retrospect thing. White supremacy is so ingrained in our society that we have to be really intentional to dismantle it. I saw it in my own work as a teenager when I was creating my own characters. And I realized that I was creating pretty much all white characters, especially on the female end, until I very intentionally began to diversify that lineup. And this is me growing up with two pro-black parents, knowing about black history, and supposedly being very proud of my own heritage. And yet I was still playing the white supremacist game anyway. So I'm not really mad when people, whether they share my ethnicity or whether they're white people, decide to intentionally diversify this stuff, because you know what? They made the white supremacist mess. It is up to them to fix it, not us.
I understand exactly what you're saying. I think what more importantly, and it's not just white people in general too. I think it's everybody. I really think everybody should sit back and before you say, do, make, create, really sit back and see how this can affect another person. And we're talking race, so I'm talking everything as a whole. And sometimes you can't do it. I get it. I understand it. But if you just sit back and just take a second. First it takes a second to think about it. Then it becomes a minute. Then it becomes longer. Right? It's the more than just the promotion of diversity. I worked for a gentleman who at a toy he made toys, right? And so he was taking a picture and putting on his website. And it was a picture, and it was three white children. Being honest, just 3 white children, and he was approving them, right? These pictures. I thought nothing of it, really didn't. I walk into his office, And he looks at the pictures, he looks at me, and he was like, we need to have diversity in this picture. All that took was a second.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It took a second. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not, I'm not saying that he was a Jewish guy, and not saying he was, I would never say he was racist or anything like that. But it just sometimes it just takes a second or something to spark saying, hey, you know what? This is what I want to do. Now, not saying that what he was doing was intentional.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was not what he was doing was intentional. But you know what? It didn't cross his mind at that time, and understandably so. It took for me to walk into his office and say, you know what, this picture is not diverse, right? And that's how it is in comics too. At the time, you didn't have to think about it.
Yep.
It was no thought. You didn't have to think about it. Now we're at a time where you like, hey, and I think I think the gentleman just said it best. He was like, hey, I'm writing comics. Now all of a sudden, whoa, wait a minute, I need to make it diverse. Mm-hmm. And that's how it starts.
Yeah.
At the beginning, that's how it starts.
Okay, and that's fair. And so the issue I sort of come back is when I look at black created characters, or let me rephrase that. When I look at black created characters and black written characters, there is some dynamic, whether it's indie or mainstream. There is some dynamic in which I would say the black writers try not to put the black characters in most of the same tropes, which is, on a rare occasion, you have the guy that, used to be in a gang and then he stops being in the gang. That trope, I hate to say it, that one just runs too deep into comics to avoid. Right. There's just too many characters. Hell, Static Shock falls into that same situation. And he's one of the...
Wait. From Milestone.
Yeah.
But I would... I would say I wouldn't say that Static Shock was just a student. Yeah, he had a bully picking on him and he got a gun, but I don't believe he was ever truly in a gang.
No, I thought that was the whole thing. Is he got called in during the gang fight?
But he was not in the gang. It was kind of one of those situations where somebody was picking on him. And so one of the guys, it was the bigger guy, was in the gang himself. He was like, hey, you got to handle this. You can't let these guys, if you continue to let these guys mess with you, they're going to get over on you. You're never going to be able to get over it. So he gives him a gun. And your boy sits there and he goes, but then he's like, I got to get out of here. And then it's like he gets caught in a big bang in the middle of trying to leave.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so all right, I'll retract my statement. Because I remember there was a big gang fight with Static.
He was not...
Yeah.
Also was definitely all gang members.
Yeah, but okay. So here's the thing: I get tired of when black writers set up the characters, they evade the tropes, and then the handoff goes into the white writer, and the white writer goes back into the tropes. So like my number, Cinch dying from being killed, from being dragged from the back of a truck. Black Panther and Storm getting divorced, finding out, Black Lightning was, out there just fornicating around when he, like, character-wise, historically, there's aren't any of these things, but they fit into these tropes that I don't like. And I would say if it wasn't for good writing, one can argue that Storm keeps falling into the Sapphire trope.
Sapphire?
Yeah, into the Sapphire trope. The primarily being used as sexuality. She doesn't pop off though. She doesn't have a bad personality. Sapphire is pretty much the inverse of a mammy. Sapphire is the inverse of the mammy. Mammy is big, fluffy, black woman, never say no wrong, sexually unattractive, but super mother figure. Sapphire is hypersexual and man-eating and pretty much man-hating.
Yeah. In other words, Mammy is
Okay.
Mammy is the woman from Gone with the Wind that says, Miss Scarlet, I don't know nothing about birthing no babies.
Or the Hattie McDaniel character.
Hattie McDaniel character, and then Sapphire would be Nicki Minaj.
Yeah, pretty much. That would be your classic trope of the Sapphire, or like in the
Storm is classier than that.
Storm is classier than that, but you look through her history, she's been passed around. Yeah, she gets passed around, and the one thing I thought that Marvel would be smart enough not to do was fall into the trope of African American equals broken family and equals high divorce. So when I saw the Black Panther Storm marriage, I was like, yes, this is going to be the next Reed Richards and Sue Richards type of, yeah, and it wasn't. As soon as it left black hands, it was like, nah, man, AVX, these two people got to get divorced.
Well, I mean, that was also a function of Disney trying to also metaphorically divorce the X-Men from the Avengers so that they could start their long secret war with Fox.
Yeah.
The first business was you had to split those two up because he's an Avenger, she's an X-Men. You can't have them hanging around all together all the time.
And they were the Fantastic Four.
And the
Fantastic Four.
Also problematic for Disney Fox Secret War.
Yeah.
Well, here's another thing too: is as we was going back to, the creation of characters and how they're brought in, because that's what we're talking about now. We're talking about how is a character brought in, and then some of the social, I'm gonna say stereotypes that come behind it. Right. So if we look at Simon Bass. Again, another Green Lantern. We all know I love Green Lantern, right? Simon Bass as a character that happens to be a Detroit-based, giving a shout-out to my Detroit hometown, but Detroit-based character that's coming out of basically... Lebanese guy, right? And if you're familiar with Detroit, Detroit has a high population of Middle Eastern in a place called Dearborn, Michigan, and so they're trying to bring this character up, right? And if I'm not mistaken, he came about the Rebirth, or no, the New 52.
New 52,
right? When he came around, but he was brought in because of 9/11. And how he had, that's why, that's why he was brought in to the Green Lantern Corps. I mean, it was based off of the events and times that were happening in the world real time. But they felt that, hey, let's bring in a character and bring it to let's bring this to a positive light. I mean, y'all get what I'm saying?
Yeah, he was set up for a terrorist attack that he didn't do.
Bingo, right. And so let's bring this into a positive spin. But unfortunately, it lended itself to a stereotype. Right, you see what I'm saying? And in some cases, I have to give some of these writers just the creativity, to bring in characters, especially during troubled times. Now, granted, September 11th, that day was troubled times. Months, maybe a year after, that was troubled times. And American psyche or perception at that time may not have been great. Okay, right. But for comics to bring it in and say, okay, let's put a good spin on this, I appreciate that, because now we set that back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Okay, before my time. Now I'm a 70s baby, but before my time, I don't know anything about that. But from my mom's perspective, she probably can relate to, hey, this was what's actually was going on. And comics that my father and my grandfather, who were avid comic book collectors, preferably Green Lantern, they, you know, they read comics. They knew how comics was brought in. Muhammad Ali was brought in with Superman, and I can't think of the one guy. He's based out of Detroit too. They had a whole Justice League out of Detroit.
Vibe.
Yeah,
right. Vibe. Yeah, I mean, you know, in Detroit during that time, you know, hey, it was on and popping. You know what I'm saying? But you know, comics were. They used the Motor City to bring it out to say, hey, here's a spin. You may not like it initially, but here are your superheroes that's coming out now. I mean that's how comic books did it. They tried to touch on social issues. That at least this is my opinion, and I'm really sticking. This is my opinion. They tried to touch on social issues in the best way they knew how. Okay, very similar to how it was done in television. If you think about shows like All in the Family or The Jeffersons, Good Times, during the 70s, 60s, 70s times, they tried to, here's a stereotype, but this is how it really is. That's just my impression of it. I could be totally wrong. I understand it. It's debatable. I get it. But that's how I think how comic books kind of did it, how we understand it as television.
Yeah.
Did it also as well.
And just for a side note, I did Google it here. First appearance of Simon Bass was in 2012. So I will say this. It was the distancing enough of the creation of Simon Bass good enough so that his appearance plus his impact would be maximized. I would say about yes. Like it wasn't going to tank the company because they had him as a character, but at the same time they could touch on it and at a safe enough time distance. But so like when we talk about like historical diversity in comics, and we talk about the 70s and 80s in particular, we know that it was chasing market trends. It was like, look, black exploitation films are popular. I'm going to have black exploitation film like characters. I mean, classically, even going into the 90s, what was the Duffy story? It's like superpowered Negroes on skateboards.
Yeah, Teenage Mutant Ninja skateboard riders.
Yeah. And go ahead, Will, and tell that story, because now I probably just got completely demonetized and struck by YouTube because I used the word Negro. But go ahead.
Okay. So McDuffie back in the early 90s was in a meeting with Marvel. And so Marvel had pitched all these series and you know, and everything. And one of the days McDuffie kind of wrote this pitch for a comic called Teenage Negro Skateboard Riders. And all the characters are like Rocket Racer, Night Thrasher. He had like 8 or 9 characters that were Marvel Comics characters. They were all on skateboards. And, of course, some of the bigwigs were like, this doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? So I was like, well, exactly. Like, number one, in the current black demographic, you don't have that many kids doing skateboards. So why do we have 21% of our characters in the comic world using skateboards as their primary way of mobility? Like, that's their hat trick. That's their ability. Like, Night Thrasher, okay, yeah, he was kind of a good detective and a good martial artist. Rocket Racer, yeah, he was a, inventor. And then, like, in the script, he even had the white girl. And the name was just a girl. And, like, she was the girl that could have been the romantic interest of any of them, but felt like they were too close to be, like, friends to her to really be a romantic interest. And so, like, and then he came up with one of my favorite lines he's ever said. He said, can we please just write, and this is the big response came out of, I believe it was Warren Ellis, writing one of the Cage books. And so when he wrote the Cage book, he wrote it very exploitation in the 90s. And of course, you know, when they asked him where he got his inspiration, he said, well, blaxploitation films from Scotland. You know, Ellis was born and raised in Scotland, so of course he watched old exploitation, and that's how he wrote Cage. And they were like, what's the final point? He said, can we just have good characters that happen to be black instead of trying to write black characters and make them sound like jive talking 70s characters?
Yeah.
They're caricatures of themselves. Can we have heroes that are good heroes that just happen to be black and represent their community, and not be these tropes that no black kid in the 90s is looking at a comic book board, man, I want to ride a skateboard now.
Yeah.
Right.
And
you know, and so it just didn't match the demographic. He said, if you're trying to reach black kids, you need to write comics that reach black kids.
Right.
So that was the main crux of that, and I think that's why.
Not only that, though, not even just reaching black kids, you also have to reach black parents, because the black parents are the ones who are giving them the money to buy.
Yep.
Right. So that's something too that you have to understand, that basically if the parent's not feeling it, you ain't reading it.
Yeah. Well, and you look at like Milestone. Right. There's a milestone in its creation. It was a bunch of people that got sick and tired of seeing black characters written in the regular tropes. The problem is, because DC was ultimately the money man behind it, you know, there were still issues. I mean, one of the big issues that cracked Milestone was a moment where Static was in a bed with a girl and there was a condom on the floor. And they told him they wanted it out because they were like, you can't promote safe sex on this. He's like, well, if we can't promote safe sex on the cover of a comic book, where can we promote safe sex?
Right.
And basically, McDuffie came to the terms of, no, it's not that it's a condom on the floor. It's that it's black sexuality being represented on the cover. And you don't want to see that at all. So they ended up releasing the cover, but they took the condom off and they covered up. I think they covered up the girl a little bit more. Like you could see she had like some sort of shirt or something on instead of, because originally she was going to have a sheet covering what needed to be covered, and that was it.
I don't remember this at all. This must have been after I stopped reading.
Yeah, this would have been near the end of the Static Shock run.
Okay, yeah.
And that was kind of when Milestone was going downhill. And of course, even now, I mean, they were supposed to have brought Icon back last year. Jim Lee did a full-blown cover and an interview about it and everything. Mm-hmm. And as far as we know, it's never come back. Now, something that I thought about 2 or 3 weeks ago, you know, last time we had the conversation, Edward, we talked about the idea of how could you include the black world into the conversation without making it feel judgmental. And the answer is Icon.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have maybe a case where Bruce Wayne, you know, Bruce Wayne, didn't he own like an academy in Gotham City?
I don't know. He owns a bunch of stuff.
He owns this academy. And so like one of these kids get, you know, there's a fight situation, the kid gets suspended or something, and it's a wrongful suspension. And so you have the main character that is Icon as the lawyer, because he's a lawyer in real life.
Yeah.
You know, and so he could be there meeting up with Bruce Wayne. And, you know, they all know who each other is. But it's the idea he would be the catalyst of it because he understands both sides. He understands living as a human on a world where he's not human, because he's an alien too.
Yeah.
And also, he understands the standards of being privileged because he's done enough and earned enough where he may not be quite as rich as Bruce Wayne, but he's pretty close.
But he also was a slave too. He was a slave too. That was the thing.
Because literally they could be sitting there talking. It's like, well, it's not like any of us lived through slavery. And he goes, actually, I did.
Yeah.
The idea of him having to live through that period and understanding, because McDuffie wrote him as a Republican, like a staunch Republican. Like
that made sense back then, but
you know how you do it now. Because even if you did it now,
sounds so polarized now that I'm not sure if Icon works the same way.
I could see how it does as the conservative, but I was like, I can see how you could still keep him that way, because then it's a philosophy thing. If we go into the right versus alt-right and we take it into the actual, like, how the conservative views look at it, like alt-right is the racist, then there's alt-light, which are the conservatives that didn't like the way conservatism was going and thought it was a bunch of sellouts in Washington, and then you have the classical, hey, we say we're about cutting down on the budget, but we'll still blow a bunch of money, Republican conservatives. Like, it's three camps. Like, there's some that are like, we want change, And then in the middle of those guys that said we want change, there was like some of them were yelling white power, and then they were like, hold on, wait, we don't know these guys, we just want change. And then the other conservatives were like, well, we've been doing this for a while, it's going to stay this way. So not everybody is the enemy of your enemy is your friend. But as a person that knows the beginning of the alt-right term and then what it got promoted as, it's completely different, because I have listened to, Gavin McInnes, I have listened to Lauren Southern. Like when it first started, those were your faces of it, and then that one freaking KKK dude came in, and then he got lumped into it, and then it was just like, oh gosh, no, he's not one of us, and then the term just went south.
Co-opted now.
It'd been co-opted, and then it just turned into like the Lauren Southerns and Gavin McInnes would say they're alt-light, and so there's that. So like, are all those parties saying like build the wall? Yes, but some of those parties are like
are quite different.
Are different. Yeah. Yes. I want to say that. That's quite different. Like Lauren Southern's like, hey, if you got here legally, that's fine. The KKK guy is, we don't want them Mexicans here. So you could still write. You could still write Icon as conservative, and I mean, even with that, and I was sort of bringing this up on the Facebook post. It's not like Black thought is a monolith. And I know I'm using the Keenan Peele statement from the Black conservatives, but Black thought is not a monolith, and let alone Black conservatism or Black liberalism or Black modernism. It's not a monolith, because we are freaking individuals. Like there are some community things that are overarching in general, but I think even that is breaking down, because things that are culturally normative in Black communities, from economic sections to even geographical sections, those striations, you start dividing things up. Like a Californian African American life is not the same as like a Kansas City African American life, let alone a person that lives in Chicago, or let alone lives in freaking Alabama or Georgia.
Right.
Yep. Right. Quite different.
It's quite different. Because I've had folks, I tell folks, like, I live in the hood, and Kansas City hood is way rougher than Tulsa hood, because I know I used to live in Tulsa.
Or Houston hood.
But it ain't Chicago hood. It ain't Chicago hood. Okay? So if I use that word, some folks be like, oh, man, Edward, where he lives is rough.
Living in the suburbs.
He's like, yeah. I'm like, I'll hear shots fired in the back, and I have to get down. But I'm not afraid of a home invasion every 5 seconds. I can walk the streets at night, sorta, if I'm careful.
Right.
Whereas if I was in another part of my city, I wouldn't walk the streets at night at all. But again, like those ideas that there's a monolith of a Black culture, that is, and even going back to the whole, W.B. Du Bois type mindset of, your talented 10th, like there's always been cultural stratification, whether it's been economic or intellectual. It's not all just like, oh, woe is me, I'm oppressed.
Go back to your instincts too as well. I mean, that's something else that that plays a part. You always go back to, when I say instincts, I'm more saying like from your parents' standpoint,
right?
Like someone asked me a question. Actually, this happened maybe a couple of weeks ago. They asked me. They said, "Hey, man, why did you go to the University of Miami? Right, man, you're from Detroit. Why in the world? Why would you go down there?" And this is the honest to God truth. When I was coming out of high school, I was being recruited by tons of schools, right? And my father went to Syracuse. My mother went to Northwestern. All right, they were athletes. The reason why I went to the University of Miami was because I went to a football game when they played the University of Michigan. And when I looked out there on the field, that was the first time I've ever seen a university that had a whole lot of Black people on there. Mm-hmm. You got to keep in mind this was the 80s. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
So, right. So when I looked at that, I'm like, whoa, this school is good in sports. I'm good in sports. I want to go to a school that's good in sports where I see a lot of black people. Now, it wasn't until I went to my visit, I realized that, oh, the only black people that was there was on the sports team. Right. So that was a culture shock. But then also something that really, really got me is that the girls there at Miami and then within the community was very similar to how it was in Detroit, where you didn't have certain things that was going on. Now, I didn't know 10 years earlier that this was a problem, but at the time, it's like, hey, you could go out, you could hang out, everybody was cool. That's why I went there. That was the probably number one reason why I chose Miami over Syracuse. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, once I got my degree, when we were going to grad school, I got mature. I would say intellectually. It was said, okay, now it was like, now, homeboy, you need to go get the best education there is. And then now I said, okay, here was my choices for grad school. All right, grad school, either I was going to go to UCLA, all right, I was going to go to Vanderbilt, or I could go back home and be at Michigan. Now, here's the catch. Vandy, that's a different element, right? We're talking the mid '90s now, right? Mm-hmm. I was like, Tennessee at that point it wasn't like Tennessee now.
Oh no,
right? UCLA. Yeah, UCLA at that point in time, you also had to keep in mind what was going on during there. You had the OJ trial, you had the riots and stuff going on during that time. I didn't want to be a part of that. It just had a bad taste. So I went back home to Michigan. Right. So what I'm trying to say is though you kind of look at your environment, you look at what's going on, and those is how you start to make some of the decisions that you make it throughout your life, right? Yeah. And I know I'm probably the oldest one on this panel right now. I'll be 45 in April. So
you're not the oldest one.
You're not the oldest one.
Okay, well, good. I feel good now. I'm from the Lord. I was at a party yesterday.
I guess I'm the youngest one.
Right. So like I said, those are types of things that you make your decisions throughout your life, and you live with them. You know what I'm saying? Would I change some things? Probably not, but things has been okay so far. And you live your life every single day.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point, because if someone told me, like, if I had to go to school in St. Louis now, I would tell them hell to the is no. Because, I mean, I wouldn't. But I actually, like, when I was looking at school, I was thinking about SLU for a period of time. But, knowing what I know now, I'm sort of glad I didn't. But there are some things, like, time frame does set, what is culturally appropriate. Right. If I go and I look back at some of those 70s and 80s comics, I'm like, okay. But for the time, that's within parameter, and it's not pushing it. Whereas some things today, we would be like, that's racist. And for the time, it wasn't. For them, they were like, we're being progressive. Right. So and there's that.
To that point, I kind of want to bring up a case study with my favorite superhero team out there, and that's the Legion of Superheroes. It was created in the late 50s, and because it was created in the late 50s, you look at those old team pictures, and it's just wall-to-wall white people, basically.
Yep.
Even the green guy is basically a white guy.
The white guy in features, yeah.
Yeah, Brainiac 5. And it took a long time for that team to diversify. Originally, one of their new characters, Pharaoh Lad, was supposed to be a black man. He was he was introduced masked, and the writer, a very young Jim Shooter at the time, his intention was for him to unmask and be like, "Hey, yo, I'm black," and because they're in the 30th century, the rest of the team was like, "Okay, that's cool," but Shooter was shot down by his editors, who were afraid that doing so would cost them sales in the South.
Bingo.
Right.
That's yes.
It was one key way and key reason why, even to this day, the team is still pretty much almost completely white people and a few aliens here and there, and only a few people of color and a very few black characters. The first of their official black characters was one named Tyrock.
And with a spear! With the space spear!
Yep.
Sorry.
And
Sorry.
He was basically written as a black separatist, and in his introduction, he wound up kind of getting lectured at by the Legionnaire members, who are basically saying we don't see color, sort of speech back in the 70s. When that seemed like really enlightened back then, but you look back at it now and it's like, why are you guys preaching at him? You don't really have the standing to preach at him, honestly.
Right.
The next character they had was Invisible Kid, and he was a legacy character. There was originally an Invisible Kid who was killed in the line of duty.
Yeah, I thought so.
And but the second one, he was black, but he was just kind of a legacy character. So that's the second way in which black characters tend to get introduced in comics. First, they're either a bit angry or somehow separate from the main cast, or they're a legacy character who just kind of fits in where they fit in.
So you think about like a character like say Rage in the Avengers.
Gosh!
Yep.
Oh gosh!
Rage is very much in the Tyrock mold.
Oh gosh! I hate Rage.
Yeah.
There was also a Superman that was like Rage as well.
And what's so bad about it is that they brought him back in the new run of Falcon. And dear God, don't let me get started on Falcon. You're going to have to give me a minute on Falcon. But,
Okay.
They did this whole thing with Rage when they brought him back, and he was still the same pissed off dude. I'm like, dude, you've been a new Warrior, you've been an Avenger. Have you not learned anything?
You know what, though? I didn't mind Rage so much in this time and this day and age because of the Black Lives Matter movement and the increasing militancy of some people,
right,
younger people. So he kind of fit better now.
Right, but at the time he was originally introduced, he didn't fit as well.
Oh shoot, that's a Google. But hold on, wait. But before we trail off, this is sort of the last topic I want to hit, and we sort of touched on. We didn't really get into it, and it's sales. Yes. Okay, all right. And I say this because I have read Black Panther. I was pretty consistent in buying Black Panther from like somewhere in the 90s all the way up until I stopped when the Hell's Kitchen arc ended. I stopped. I haven't read Tiatsi Coates' run, and I didn't read the freaking Wakandan Space. Okay, so I haven't read that. I'm just going to let you all know that now. Okay.
I haven't either. I stopped at I think it was Christopher Priest run.
Oh, okay. That's a bit earlier than when I stopped. But here's the thing. I have seen Black Panther on, off because of sales. Bishop on, off because of sales. And my problem sort of comes back to this whole, yay, they're here, I don't see color thing. I like diversity and all this other stuff. I don't see the wallet matching up. I don't see it. I see that the black populace supporting a black book is not enough for a major publisher. And I think there are not enough people that say, oh, I don't mind diversity, to actually back that up with their wallet. I don't think it's there. The folks will say, like, I like the character, there's nothing wrong with them being there, but they won't put their money where their mouth is. It's just like when people complain, like, I don't want this in a video game, and then it gets taken out and they don't go buy the game. It's the same thing. It's if you say, like, look, I'm woke, I'm about the diversity and the inclusion, and then you don't buy it. At the same time, when I dealt with folks, it's like, I like comics and I'm pro-black, and I'm like, When's the last time you actually bought a Black Panther comic and not just got it off online? When's the last time you got a book that mainly headlined an African American or at least a African descent looking person? And that's the problem.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah,
it is that the people that are signaling diversity do not up their money, and it's mostly, you know, the folks just like, well, I like the book. You know, it's just the random people that you just get. They're like, I like the book, I like the character, I like where this is set at. You know.
Well, here's a good example. All right, going back in the day. Let's look at hip hop. Okay, rap music. Early '80s, pretty much, no one was buying it. Right? It was bought in the black communities. Okay, in the hood. Look at it now. Is how it's promoted. I'm gonna go here. Is how it's promoted, and it's promoted to younger people. Okay, and there's a medium for it to be promoted. Okay, radio, television, MTV going on back then, and now comic books do not have that same. They don't have that same. I would say medium to promote it, except for at the movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except for at the movies. The reason why Black Panther was so successful, yes, we all came out to go watch it. A lot of people came out to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
Worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did we come out to watch it, it was well written.
Yeah.
It was quality. And I'm gonna go back to hip hop. At the beginning, it was, we were toying with it. Now it's well written, well promoted, out there. Everybody's buying it. I can say it like this. I'm not sure what universes, I would say subsets, that Black Panther is in now. I think he's probably with the Avengers.
He's actually in the future. It's dumb. He's in Wakanda forever.
Are we talking about the main comic, or are we talking about the character?
The character.
I'm talking about
the character.
He's also he's also on the Avengers too.
Is he?
Okay.
Because the Wakanda forever thing is actually T'Challa. From what I watched the things online to keep up.
Yeah. Well, they're doing a book. They did a book. They started a book back early 2018 where it's like Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, the new She-Hulk, which looks almost like a dude.
The
Black
current
Panther,
Avengers,
Doctor Strange, and the new Ghost Rider with the car.
Yeah, this is the current Avengers lineup, and Black Panther is the chairman of the team.
Okay, all right, whatever. Something
really
else is going on. This is some side crap. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So here's the thing, though. Going back to putting the dollars into the putting dollars to the actual unit here. Let Ghost Rider come out with a movie, and now you pair that with Black Panther. It will be the biggest seller probably ever.
Yeah, if they can do it well, sure.
Right. Let Black Panther lead the Avengers. It will be the best seller ever.
They're not going to do that. Captain Marvel is, and it's going to make me cry.
Right, but you get what I'm saying now.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is once one comes out, that's great. People love it, they enjoy it, they can vibe with it, they can do whatever with it. Then I can say color means nothing. Does it have a beat? Yes, I like it. I'm buying it. Same thing with the movie Black Panther. It was good. People go watch it. Every movie that comes out.
So
I think Black Panther is going to be on the same line from a movie perspective as Spider-Man.
Yes.
Okay, so like Jay-Z said, it's like my name's not. It's like I'm not black. I'm OJ, and everybody was like, okay.
Right.
All right. I'm going to wrap it up because we've been talking for a little bit over an hour, and I like to thank my guests for staying on because we've been talking since the last show. But I'm going to wrap up with this story that I had last year at Father's Day, and I come back from.
I was just going to say, before you wrap it up, can I tell a quick thing?
Oh, go ahead.
There's a book out now by Lion Forge, and the name of it's called Quinn Credible. Basically, it's a kid named Quinn.
I really like that.
He's in New Orleans. I believe it's in New Orleans. And it's right after Katrina. There's an event that occurs, and all these people get powers. It's a lot of the characters that are from the Lion Forge universe are all connected by this thing. Well, Quinn Credible is cool because he's just impervious to stuff, to pain on the outside. He even talks about how, yeah, my heart can still be broken, but my body just can't be. There's kind of this idea that he is tough on the outside, but he's still trying to figure out what it means to be a hero internally. And so that's a book I'd highly recommend. That's really character-driven and family-focused. He has his father. He has his mother. It's him. He's kind of a nerdy kid, and he's just an awesome character. So that's a book I'd highly recommend for those of you who want to walk outside of the Marvel DC auspice of reading.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
I co-sign on that one.
All right. So I'm gonna wrap up with this story. It happened last year, Father's Day. Coming back, flying in from US Nats. I'm at the Kauffman Stadium or the K. I have my Royal shirt on that my brother bought me, and I'm wearing my Black Panther talons. Which, if you see me on Facebook, or you see me at a big tournament, you see me with my talons on. So I'm walking, coming from the restroom, going back out to see my family after the game. And a little white kid runs up to me, taps me, and he says, "Wakanda forever." And that moment touched me because he actually liked Black Panther because he was cool. And I sat there and I talked to him for 5 minutes with his father and his mother there. And they didn't feel endangered by me, and the kids lighten up, and he's asked me, "Where did you get your talents from? Where can I get those from? Blah, 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 blah." And we talked about the movie for a little bit, and I said, "Wakanda forever, little dude. I'll check you later." And it let me know that the characters now, that other people can love Black characters, and it's okay. And there's other folks to even Calder. It's okay for you to say Wakanda forever. If we're going to go to this integrationist type mindset, then there has to be a point where we're able to appropriate using current terms, others' cultures respectfully, and also depict each other respectfully or honestly. If we're not all perfect, but we're not all tropes either. So, again, I'd like to thank my guests for being on. It's a little bit more heavier part. If you listen through the whole thing, thank you. If you have comments, put them below. I'll be looking whenever I can. And that's it. Like always,